and I'll mute. And feel free to interrupt at any point with a question or a comment. I wanted to talk today. Today is Monday, September 13th, and Yom Kippur begins Wednesday evening this week, 6:45 in our shul for Kol Nidre. Always begins a little bit before candlelighting time. So I wanted to go through Yom Kippur, but especially focus on the last service of the day, because when I've talked about Yom Kippur and preparing for the holidays before in other videos, I don't think I've spent as much time on the Niela service, the last service of the day, rather focusing on some of the highlighted prayers that we're more familiar with. But so Yom Kippur, some people suggest it's the holiest day of the year because it's called Shabbat Shabbaton, the Sabbath of Sabbaths. Some would argue that Shabbat is the holiest day of the year. And so it's a philosophical argument. It doesn't really matter what's the holiest day of the year, but there is a tradition that we know kind of how holy the day is by how many honors are divided from the Torah reading that morning. So today's a Monday. Monday is a Torah reading day. Monday and Thursday are weekdays in which we read Torah, and you have 3 aliyot. So that's the minimum, 3 aliyot. It's a regular weekday, nothing else happening. If it's Rosh Chodesh, the new month, the beginning of the new month, one is still allowed to work. It's a semi-holiday in that there was an extra sacrifice that the Torah tells us was brought on the new moon. So when we read Torah on a Rosh Chodesh, there are 4 aliyot. So one more than a regular weekday, but still not like Shabbat. When a holiday falls on a weekday, like Rosh Hashanah or Passover, Sukkot, Shavuot, you have 5 aliyot. Okay, so there's Musaf, there's the additional sacrifice, and it's a day of rest. So 5 aliyot on all the holidays, except Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, there are 6 aliyot. And there are only 7 aliyot on a holiday or Yom Kippur if Yom Kippur or a holiday fall on Shabbat. Shabbat has 7 aliyot. So the most aliyot is on Shabbat. And then, so therefore, one could argue that Shabbat is the holiest of all the sacred times, because that's the most aliyot that you can have on a Shabbat. And in fact, it's on Shabbat that you can subdivide even more. You can add extra aliyot, which you cannot do on any other day. On a holiday, 5 aliyot, you can't add more. You're not allowed to subdivide the portion anymore to make an extra honor. You can only do that on Shabbat morning. So Yom Kippur then, this year, Wednesday night, Thursday, a weekday, not a Shabbat. So 6 aliyot. So there's an element there about the sanctity of Yom Kippur. However, there are other elements of Yom Kippur that kind of make it into a more sacred occasion than an average Shabbat is. So of course, it's a day of fasting. The Torah tells us that we are supposed to ve'initem et nafshotechem. You are supposed to afflict your souls. And that's understood by the rabbis as fasting. So it's a 25-hour fast. The holiday begins at sunset and ends at nightfall the next day. So from sunset to nightfall the next day is 25 hours, not 24 hours. So it's a 25-hour fast plus a little bit more. Because like for me, so technically speaking, The holiday begins at 6:58 Wednesday night and is over at 7:58. There are different segments of the community that count candle lighting time and nightfall a little bit differently. Candle lighting, most people agree that candle lighting time is 18 minutes before sunset. So in other words, if you go to your weather app on your iPhone and you look to today, it will tell you what time sunrise is and what time sunset is in your current location. So sunset, there's that technical time when sunset is. Candle lighting is 18 minutes before sunset. So no matter where you are in the world, if you want to figure out what time to light Shabbos candles and you don't, well, the one thing you can do is go to hebcal.com and enter your zip code. Or if you're someplace outside of America, you just enter, if you're in a location that Hebcal knows, like a major city as opposed to some random village somewhere in the world, you can, Hebcal knows where you are and will tell you what time candle lighting is. So candle lighting is 18 minutes. So otherwise, if you don't have access to the internet, just ask a local in the town that you're in, what time is sunset, then subtract 18 minutes. That's what time candle lighting will be. And I count the end of Shabbat, nightfall, right? Because the rabbi said that when 3 stars appear. Okay, so, but what time is that? What time is it that 3 stars will appear? So I count an hour, I add an hour to candle lighting time. So let's say this week, Yom Kippur begins at 6:58. So add an hour to that, 7:58, that's when Yom Kippur is over the next day. Okay, that's how I do it. If you enter onto Hebcal, like Hebcal can create a whole calendar for you if you want, and you can include on the calendar whatever you want, holidays, Torah readings, counting the Omer, et cetera, et cetera. And you can include candle lighting time and Havdalah. So for Havdalah, I always put 42 minutes after candle lighting. It's like one of those options there. So 42 and 18 makes an hour and makes 60 minutes. So that's how it works out. So that's how I've been taught, and that's how most in the conservative movement count. There are those in more orthodox segments of the community that wait a little bit longer than that for the conclusion of Shabbat. So at an hour after candle lighting, it is dark outside and there are 3 stars in the sky, and that is the end. So what led me on this tangent is that it's extra 25 hours. So we start Kol Nidre before candle lighting. The reason for that is, and everybody starts Kol Nidre before candle lighting, because the first service of Yom Kippur, the Kol Nidre service, begins with, well, it's the evening service that begins with the prayer Kol Nidre, where we're asking we're asking God to annul vows that we may make this coming year inadvertently. So it has beautiful music associated with it. It has beautiful choral arrangements associated with it. But you can imagine, commercials on television where they have the small print at the end, the legal, exceptions, or when on the radio you're hearing somebody advertise something and then talk very fast at the end. That exactly is what Kol Nidre is. And so imagine doing those legal contractual obligations to this beautiful choral music that was written. So it's kind of funny to think of it in that way, but that essentially is a legal phrase a legal statement that we are making. We're asking God to annul vows that we may make this coming year prematurely. For the rabbis, that's a legal arrangement that has to be made in front of a Beit Din, in front of a tribunal, and Batei Din, that's a plural, tribunals can only meet during daylight hours, which is why Kol Nidre has to happen while it's still daylight. So 6:58, 6:45 is when we're starting the service. And, because of the nature of the kind of person I am, I get to the synagogue a lot earlier than that. So I'll actually have I usually have 26 hours of fasting on Yom Kippur. And others who are arriving to synagogue to get a parking spot will have more than 25 hours as well. So Kol Nidre begins with this halachic legal statement that we are making, and the Beit Din is represented in synagogue by Torah scrolls being taken out of the ark. And when two Torah scrolls are on either side of me on the bima, that represents the Beit Din, the spiritual Beit Din that we are convening in order to enter into this year in as clean a slate as possible, with as much sincerity as possible, that we want to be the best that we can be this coming year. So, of course, our custom for Kol Nidre, for the holding of the Sifrei Torah, are to call up the current and past presidents of the congregation onto the bima to alternate holding the Torah for each of the 3 times that the Kol Nidre is recited. So it's a legal statement that is repeated 3 times to be sure. So traditionally it starts off low, and then it gets a little bit louder the second time and louder the third time, to ensure that we are all paying attention to our prayers, even from the most mundane legal to the most spiritual. So Kol Nidre is added to the evening service, and then a lot of the Yom Kippur service, like Rosh Hashanah, is known for the piyutim. Oh, so what else makes Yom Kippur sacred besides the fasting, besides this very spiritual Beit Din that we are convening on the bima? The tradition is to wear white. I wear a kittel, the traditional robe that is worn. Cantor Adina wears that kittel as well. And there are other people in the congregation who wear a kittel during Yom Kippur. Anybody. It's a tradition for everybody to wear a kittel to add to the sanctity of the day. Now, a kittel is traditionally worn under the chuppah when you get married. That your wedding day is supposed to begin with a clean slate and in purity. So that's what the white represents of the kittel. It's a tradition to wear a kittel when leading a seder. So my father never wore a kittel, so I never wear a kittel, even though I've taught that the tradition is to wear a kittel. I just haven't done that. But it is a tradition to wear a kittel when leading the Passover Seder. And the kittel, God forbid, is supposed to remind us of the shrouds that the dead wear when they are prepared for burial. So that, and that shroud, just as the soul of the dead is prepared to enter a new phase of life in sanctity and in purity. So these are the times of year that remind us, or times in our lives that remind us of this sanctity and purity. So the kittel on Yom Kippur is for anybody and everybody to wear. And we're not supposed to wear leather which usually means not wearing leather shoes on the holiday. Wearing leather shoes is a sign of understood as a vanity, luxury, that we're concerned about how we look. We're another element related to death, like the kittel, reminding us of the shrouds the dead wear. The wearing of non-leather shoes also reminds us of sitting Shiva, being in mourning. So we are wanting to humble ourselves at the same time on Yom Kippur. So the fasting, the wearing of non-leather shoes and non-leather products, wearing of the kittel, and our custom with a lot of other synagogues across America to bring a box or can of food to donate to a shelter or a food pantry, highlights the idea that this fasting, we are choosing to fast, and we are privileged that we can choose to fast, as opposed to other people who are hungry all the time. So it relates to the Haftarah on Yom Kippur morning, in which Isaiah, the Haftarah taken from the 58th chapter of Isaiah, in which Isaiah speaks to the people of Israel. God doesn't want your sacrifices if you immediately go after the sacrifice about your business of neglecting God's ways and neglecting the disadvantage in the community. Is this the fast God wants, Isaiah says, to neglect the hungry, to not clothe the naked? So that's the idea. We want to follow through on the prayers of Yom Kippur, and that the fasting should actually mean something and should lead us to feed the hungry. So, so all of these things, these physical things that we do, wearing white, fasting, not wearing leather, bringing in some food to donate to a pantry, all of these things are physical things that we do to highlight the themes of the day. So extreme humility, sincerity in prayer, and the prayer focusing on forgiveness and repentance. So all of the, most of the piyutim, the religious hymns that are added to the service throughout the day on Yom Kippur, relate to this theme of humility. So they're the desire and the desire for our prayers to be heard by God. So immediately after the silent Amida, after I give my sermon, that's the point in the service where I give my sermon at Kol Nidre, there isn't a repetition of the Amida, because in the evening service the Amida isn't repeated, but there are extra prayers and piyutim that are added that are familiar to us, but some just unique to this evening service of Yom Kippur. One which highlights, if you happen to have your a machzor handy, you can take a look. In the evening service, it's on page 223. So if you look at page 223, there is a prayer that's added for every holiday to the Amida. It's called Ya'aleh V'Yavo, where because it's based on the third and fourth words. The fourth and fifth word. It starts Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu, Ya'aleh V'Yavo V'Yagia V'Yareh V'Yartzeh V'Shama V'Yipaked V'Zacher V'Yikaper. So you're asking God to that our prayer to rise up to God's heavenly court for this particular holiday. So this piyut on 223 is a takeoff on those first three words of that Ya'aleh V'Yavo prayer, which is recited on all other holidays. So an extension of the idea that may our, in alphabetical order here, a number of verbs about how our prayers should rise up to God. And then another prayer, another piyut added, is on 227, in which we picture ourselves being handled by an artisan. So different artisans or professions are highlighted in this, whether a potter, a mason, a blacksmith, a sailor, a glazier, a draper, or a smelter. All of these people handle something in order to make something, except for the sailor, who has the rudder in his hand to steer the boat through the water. But everybody else has an object that they are fashioning themselves. So these professions are God, and the thing that's being molded or shaped by these professions are us. This is how we picture us, ourselves, this Yom Kippur, that we are vulnerable and that we are being handled by the sovereign of the universe. So these are themes that extend throughout the holiday, and there are prayers of forgiveness which are said at every service throughout the day of Yom Kippur. What I wanted to spend the rest of our time this morning on is one extra service that's added on Yom Kippur that does not exist any other day of the year. So on a regular weekday, we pray 3 times a day. We have the morning service, we have the afternoon service, the evening service, Shacharit, Mincha, and Ma'ariv. If it's Rosh Chodesh, a holiday, or Shabbat, Shacharit has an extra service added onto it called Musaf. Okay, so you have Shacharit, Musaf, Mincha, and Ma'ariv on every day of the year. Okay, so actually, if a day begins at night, you would have Ma'ariv, the night, and then the next morning, you have Shacharit and Musaf, and then you have Mincha, and then Ma'ariv for the next day. Okay, so there are 4 services at most on Shabbat or a holiday. A regular weekday, 3 services. Each one of those services, the core prayer is the Amidah. Okay, so there's a special morning service Amidah, afternoon service, evening service Amidah. Musaf has a special Amidah itself. On Yom Kippur, though, there's an extra service added that the rabbis created out of whole cloth. There is no historical precedent for it. There's no reference to it in the Torah. So by that I mean the Shacharit and Mincha services we do them because of the regular morning and afternoon offerings that were brought to the temple in Jerusalem, and before that to the Mishkan. So the Torah describes a special morning sacrifice and a special afternoon sacrifice, and for the sacred occasions throughout the year, an extra sacrifice that was brought to mark that special occasion, whether it's Rosh Chodesh, Shabbat, or the other sacred occasions like the book of Leviticus and Numbers point out. So each of those special sacrifices, unique to the day, become the source for the services themselves. Aside from the rabbis also saying that even apart from the sacrifices, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob prayed at a particular time of day, unique to each of them, and that became the source for the morning, afternoon, and evening services. Okay, but there is no reference to Niela on Yom Kippur. Chapter 16 of the book of Leviticus describes what happens in the morning, special on Yom Kippur, designating the goats that would be offered that day, one for the special sacrifice in the Mishkan and one that would be led off to the wilderness. The special preparation that the high priest has to undergo, the purification process, etc., and entering the Holy of Holies. So the Yom Kippur is described in the Torah in the book of Leviticus is acted out in the Machzor as well. We have later in the morning service, as part of Musaf, the Avoda service, to remind us specifically of what took place in the temple in Jerusalem. But there is no reference to the end of the day of a special service. So the rabbis decided to highlight the spirituality of the day, how important it is, the rabbis felt, that we really focus our body and soul on the concept of asking for forgiveness, for truly being, truly repenting. So those concepts are difficult for an average person to do. The saintly person might not find it difficult to behave in this way, but an average person who has so many, pulled in so many directions, tempted in so many ways, it's difficult for us to recite all of these prayers and for it to sink in. So the rabbis decided that as the day is waning, as it's starting to get darker, the sun is going down, they added this Niela service with unique prayers and piyutim to highlight this is our last chance. So if you turn ahead in the Lev Shalei Machzor to page 394, here is a brief description of the Niela service, summarized by Rabbi Reuven Hammer. So on the right-hand side on 394, this is what it says. Niela means closing and referred originally to the closing of the gates of the ancient temple in Jerusalem. I would say it doesn't just mean closing, but also means locking. So it's closing and locking. Okay, so it reminds us, if we want to connect the day to the temple in Jerusalem, as all services, like I said, are connected to sacrifices, then the connection is to the closing of the gates at the end of the day. And then, then it takes on poetic meaning, right? So if the gate is closed, does that mean that God is going to sleep? That God is not listening anymore? That's the idea that is represented. Wait, God, don't close the gate just yet. I have one last thing I want to say. So, you know, it's like movies where the door, the gate is closing from above and somebody kind of rolls on the ground to get underneath it, to get in just at the last second. That's kind of what we want to picture, that this is a last chance before that gate is closed to be in God's heavenly realm and to listen to us. So then it goes on. It then took on a more spiritual meaning and was understood to refer to the symbolic closing of the gates of heaven. On ordinary weekdays, there are 3 services at which we recite the Amidah: evening, morning, and afternoon. On Shabbat and festivals, we add a 4th, Musaf, which I went through already. In the Talmud, a 5th service called Niela was added on all fast days. Today, we recite Niela service only on Yom Kippur. So this is interesting. So all fast days, according to the Talmud. So we'd have to look to the tractate Ta'anit, which means fast day. So there's a tractate there. There are minor fast days that are added to the calendar. We just had one the day after Rosh Hashanah. That's a so-called minor fast day, in that the fast is from sunrise to sunset, kind of like what the Muslims do during Ramadan, sunrise to sunset. So on that was a Thursday, the day after Rosh Hashanah. My handy dandy weather app told me that that last week sunrise was 6:44. I get up earlier than that, so I had my breakfast as usual before sunrise, and then I fasted for the morning service that we had in shul. I don't normally fast the whole day or any, actually beyond the service. I don't fast on the minor fast days. So just as an aside, the conservative movement feels with the with the um, existence of the state of Israel and the rebuilding of Jerusalem, that there's no need to be reminded of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. We're back in Israel. Israel is rebuilt. And so we shouldn't have these fast days to remember the destruction. We should rather be focused on the rebirth. So the minor fast days are not something that I fast, and many conservative Jews don't fast. I see your hand, Danny, just a second. And the Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, which is the fast day commemorating the destruction of the temple itself, that I fast a half a day. So I will fast half a day until Mincha, but then stop fasting because Israel's rebuilt. Why focus a whole day on destruction when we should be focusing on the rebirth of Israel? There would be others who would argue, well, the temple hasn't been rebuilt yet. We should still be in mourning for the fact that there is no temple. I understand that, and breaking the glass under the chuppah at the end of the ceremony reminds us of that the temple is still destroyed, and we are living in a spiritually imperfect world. I understand that, but there's also something spiritually significant to the establishment of the state of Israel and the Jewish population of Israel is the largest population anywhere in the world outside of America. So the latest census shows just under 7 million Jews in Israel and just over 7 million Jews in America. So 2 hands up. Danny first. Unmute yourself, Danny.
So some people, when it comes to Yom Kippur, they fast starting at sundown on Kol Nidre,
right?
And then they break the fast like after Yizkor or.
Yeah. So I can't. I can only answer Danny from what the tradition is, and the tradition is to fast all day. Why some people break the fast in the middle of the day, I'm not sure. Certainly for health reasons, if there's any health, if health is impacted in any way by fasting, one should not fast. So if the doctor says that you have to take medicine all the time, then absolutely take the medicine. If you have to take the medicine with a meal, if you have to take a medicine with water, with some other beverage, absolutely take the medicine and do that. Okay, so fasting should not be something at which that we're supposed to be risking our health. But for those who might be fasting half a day because out of convenience, I can't speak to that. I can only speak to what the tradition says. Margie.
So you talked about the minor fast days and Jerusalem. What about the fast of Esther? Does that have anything to do with Jerusalem?
You're right. So that doesn't have to do with Jerusalem at all. That is a reminder of Esther asking Mordechai to tell the Jewish community of Shushan to pray for her and fast for her as she's about to go in uninvited to the king to ask him to save the Jews. So that was a 3-day fasting and prayer for her. So the idea, there are people who fast the fast of Esther, which is the day before Purim. So always it's the 13th of Adar. Purim is the 14th of Adar. So that fast leads into the evening service where we're reading the Megillah. So I don't fast the fast of Esther because I don't fast minor fast days for the Jerusalem piece, but also there's a question as to whether the book of Esther is really a historical book. Did it really happen? And do we want to lend credence to a book that maybe isn't supposed to be taken so seriously? So that's a whole other debate about the holiday of Purim and the book of Esther. It's the only book of the Bible that doesn't have God's name in it. And there's a reason for that, possibly, that scholars suggest, because it's meant to be a comedy or it's meant to be a fantasy. So written at a time, we're not sure when the book of Esther was even written, but if it was written anytime from the Babylonian exile until the time of the Romans, that entire time, short of about 50 years under the Hasmonean kings of Israel, Jews were living under the oppression of the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. So living in a time of great oppression and persecution, one could imagine writing a fantasy. What would it be like if Jews ever had this miracle of having the upper hand? So that's a lot to be said for why we read the book of Esther, to remind us that most of the time in our 4,000-year history, we were living under persecution and oppression and slaughter, that it's good to have a book in which we can play at thinking what it's like to be if roles were reversed. So do we want to have a fast day that really corroborates this whole fantasy? I don't know. So there could be an argument made for fasting the fast of Esther, but not fasting the other minor fast days, because of the more spiritual association of what it means to be persecuted, what it means to act as the majority power. How do we treat the disadvantaged and the minority in Israel today? That could be legitimate things to think about on the fast of Esther. Okay, so back to Niela. So again, the rabbis created Niela in relationship to a fast day, in which they added this extra service for focusing on our hearts, minds, and souls on the idea of wanting God to listen to our prayers. Now, fast days were established by the rabbis, not just for these historical occasions. So those are in the calendar. There are others that would be that could be added spontaneously in a time of drought. So that's what the tractate Ta'anit talks about, are those spontaneous fast days that would be called by the rabbis when rain was not coming when it was supposed to be coming. Okay, so the winter months between Sukkot and Passover is the only time in the land of Israel where it rains. So if the rain doesn't come at the right time, then crops will fail or be severely impacted. So when rain is seen as a gift from God, when rain, that's what the Torah says. The middle paragraph of the Shema talks about that. If we follow in God's ways, then God will answer us and bless us with rain at the right time. If we don't follow in God's ways, then either rain will not fall or will fall at the wrong time. So the last thing that farmers want is, as they're about to harvest, a huge rainfall to come down and destroy the harvest before it's even harvested and brought in. So it's a very tenuous time in ancient Israel to be a farmer when you can't control irrigation. There's no river, main river like the Nile or the Tigris or the Euphrates to provide water throughout the year to allow crops to thrive. So if you're only if farmers of the land of Israel are only relying on rain, then rain is seen then as a gift from God. And how can God be giving us this gift if not for us praying appropriately and acting appropriately? So that's the idea. So the rabbis would call a fast day to bring the people around and say, give up your wrong-headedness and your misdeeds, and return to God. And we're going to declare tomorrow a fast day and hope then as a result of that fast day, that the rain will start falling from the sky. And in that tractate, there is one guy who's known as the guy to call upon to ask God to answer prayers. He's known as Choni HaMe'agel, Choni the circle maker. If you just Google him, Choni HaMe'agel, you'll see lots of stories from that tractate in which he was called upon by the rabbis to, what he would do is draw a circle on the ground, stand inside that circle and pray. And God would listen to him. So the rabbis have mixed feelings about that because it smacks of sorcery, and the Torah and the rabbis are opposed to sorcery. But somehow Choni was a good Jew and seen by the rabbis as a good Jew, and for some reason God listened to Choni. So when he was alive, if he was called upon to pray, he would, and the rain would fall. So you'll look up Choni, H-O-N-I or H-O-N-N-I, the circle maker. You'll see all the stories associated with him that are mainly found in this tractate Ta'anit. Okay, so it's a slippery slope when we do these concrete physical things in order to try to convince God to do things for us. So fasting, does fasting really have an effect on God listening to our prayers? Clearly has more an effect on us. So the fasting is supposed to transform us in some way. Does it have an effect on God? We don't know. Sacrifices, the same thing. What does God really want a sacrifice? Does God demand, especially on the holiday of Sukkot? There's a tremendous amount of huge animals that are offered every day of Sukkot. Really, does God need that in order for us to celebrate the holiday of Sukkot? So there's this gray area of doing something concrete that almost seems as if it's sorcery, almost pagan, and the way pagans would offer sacrifices to a variety of gods depending on the season. So the sending the goat to Azazel, sending the goat out to the wilderness, that same kind of idea with a red thread attached to its horns to represent the sins of the people. And in the ultra-Orthodox community on Wednesday this year, Shlogan Kaparas, swinging a chicken over your head. And, okay, but again, and for moderns, that just seems like the wrong thing to do, that we as Jews don't do this anymore. And if you want a Shlog Kaparas, instead of using a chicken, there are some people who will put coins in a sack and swing that over your head. If you want to do that and then donate that money to charity, that would be a better way than swinging a chicken by its legs over your head. So, but it's a big thing. I remember Kashrus, there used to be a magazine, Kashrus magazine, that would talk about these chicken dealers in Brooklyn and in Muncie, where you can go and get the chicken and do kaparas this year on Wednesday afternoon. So, stay out of Borough Park if you don't want to hear chickens screaming and that racket. Okay, so the last paragraph of this commentary on 394, Niela is one of the most moving of all services, bringing this sacred day to a close with poetic additions to the liturgy and unique melodies. It's a worthy parallel to the Kol Nidre with which the Yom Kippur journey began. So the evening service of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur has a melody to it that is unique to both those services. That's the high holiday evening service. That tune is for Rosh Hashanah evening and Yom Kippur evening. And then the morning service has a particular tune that is different than the evening service. And just a second. see if I can get the Yitgadal v'Yikadash Shemei Rabbah. That, I think that's the tune for the morning service. And then Musaf has its own tune. Yitgadal v'Yikadash. No, is that it? Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'olam V'lo Me'omaya. That's the Musaf service, okay? So that's the tune for the Musaf service. But Ne'ilah has its own tune that is different from every other tune for the high holidays. So it was really hard for me. The one time that I led services in a small synagogue in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, while I was in rabbinical school. So there are these little synagogues that will contact rabbinical schools for students to come to lead services for them. And so Great Barrington contacted the seminary, and I was offered that. I said, okay. So I just had to learn all these tunes. And I'm a little bit musical, but I can't read music. And to shift, it's very hard to shift from the afternoon service of Yom Kippur, which has its own melody like the morning service, to then go to the Ne'ilah tune was very hard to do. So it takes tremendous talent to be able to go from one tune to the other like that. So for those who can read music, it makes it a lot easier. You can just put the few notes there, like just write it into your machzor, and then that will help you do it. It's really hard to. So Ne'ilah has its own tune, and the idea for it's a service in which the Amida is repeated. Right? We don't repeat the Amida in the evening service. Never is the Amida repeated in the evening service. The idea is that there was a question by the rabbis, even if we had to do the evening service, because like I said, the Torah talks about a standard morning and a standard afternoon sacrifice. It didn't mention an evening sacrifice. It did mention that the fire would stay burning on the altar all night. So some rabbis said that means we do an evening service. Other rabbis said you don't have to do the evening service. So because there's a question whether it's obligatory to have the evening service or not, it's represented by not repeating the Amida. Okay, so morning and afternoon, you could repeat the Amida, or you start the Amida out loud. Amida is always silent in the evening service. Ne'ilah, Amida is repeated. And when we start the repetition of the Amida, right, on the high holidays, when we start the repetition, we have the ark open. We don't do that on other times of the year. We never open the ark for the repetition of the Amida on Shabbat or any other day of the year. But on the high holidays, we do, because there's an extra prayer added in there. And so we open the ark for that. But then we close it and then open it again from other additional prayers that are added to the Musaf service. But for Ne'ilah, we open the ark at the repetition and keep it open for the rest of the service. So there's another physical thing we're doing. Not only are we fasting, not only are we wearing non-leather shoes, not only are we wearing white, but it's near the end of the fast. It's entering into the 25th hour of the fast, aside from what Danny asked before. So assuming we're fasting all day and we hadn't broken the fast before, then it doesn't really count. It's not really hard then if you've broken your fast to then do Ne'ilah. But if you haven't broken your fast, traditionally you shouldn't have, you're still fasting, you're thirsty, you're hungry, you're standing now for this last hour or 45 minutes for this repetition of the Amida with the ark opened. So extra, so kind of like extra proof to God that we really mean what we're saying. We're willing to suffer for these prayers and for these words to prove to you, God, that we are sincere in asking for forgiveness, and that we know what it means to repent, and that we are committing ourselves to start fresh in this new year. So this Niela Service. So we have the custom, as many synagogues do, of allowing people to come up to the bima one by one or couple by couple as the ark is open for extra private prayers to be added to the service at this point. So we will be doing that again with the appropriate physical distancing. So that adds to the spirituality. So the sun is setting, beautiful sky that we see through the windows of our beautiful sanctuary. We see that the day is transforming outside of us, and that physical transformation that we see in the sky is highlighted by the physical transformation that's going in our bodies as we've been extra thirsty and hungry, and the spiritual transformation as well. So all these transformations working together to make the Niela service the beautiful, spiritual, challenging service that it's meant to be. So any other questions or comments about this? Yes, Margie. I can't, you're unmuted, but I can't hear you.
Going back to
There
the
you go.
beginning, when you were talking about Shabbat
Yeah.
and Yom Kippur, I know you can have a bris on Shabbat. Could you have a bris on Yom Kippur?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. In fact, our number 2 child, Elon, his due date was Rosh Hashanah, or right around there. So I was kind of hoping, in a funny kind of way, that it would work out that we'd have a Yom Kippur bris with it, so that, wouldn't have to feed anybody. Right? They're there in shul anyway. Don't even have to worry about inviting anybody. Everybody's in shul anyway. I'm not sure when in the service, though, the bris would take place. I've never, ever, in my 32 years of being a rabbi, I've never had done a bris on Yom Kippur. The challenge would be getting a moel to attend, right? So a moel would have to agree to stay in the community and be there to come to shul to do the bris. So the bris would be in the synagogue, absolutely. Not sure when in the service it would be, but yes, a bris happens on the 8th day, no matter what day it is. The only reason not to do a bris is the health of the child, or if a moel can't make it.
Yeah, we had a Shabbat bris for Josh, and we actually had to go to the Orthodox synagogue in Silver Spring for the moment to do it.
Okay. So that's interesting too. So, it goes both ways. The moel isn't supposed to travel, but the family isn't supposed to travel either. So, so just, okay. But that aside, yes. So for example, if a baby was born by C-section on Shabbat, and the bris would be, then the 8th day would be Shabbat. The first day of birth is the first day. So you count 1 that day. So the 8th day would be Shabbat. You don't do bris on Shabbat for a C-section. That gets postponed to the next day. So natural birth, all things being equal, bris happens on the 8th day, no matter what day it is. Yeah. Okay. So we'll end here today. I wish everybody a Gemar Chatima Tova, that we should be sealed completely into the book of life. Gemar Chatima, that the signature should be completed for good and for blessing in the book of life for all of us. Shana Tova, everybody.
Shana Tova.